The bite of cold iron, a stark, unyielding presence against her skin, was Clara's inevitable dawn. Not a gentle awakening. More a jolting metallic summons from the thin refuge of sleep, invariably orchestrated by the chain. Her brutal daily torment in the mire and filth of the pigpen, sleep when it came, was a shallow shivering thing, a gray expanse populated by half-formed terrors, and the gnawing emptiness in her belly. Tonight, however, a fragment of a story snatched from a whispered conversation between traveling tinkers overheard years ago. A tale of a girl with hair like moonlight who flew on the back of a great white owl, had flickered stubbornly behind her eyelids, a fragile spark against the consuming darkness that defiance, the brief claim to a sliver of beauty, was shattered not by coherent dreams, but by the raw metallic scrape of her latest desperate rebellion. She had dared a small act, a slow, agonizing inching of her small, bony body, across the frozen mud, a desperate attempt to find a less excruciating purchase for the heavy, rust-pitted shackle, against the constantly weeping bloody lesions on her ankle. Each movement was a symphony of tiny private agonies, the rough iron a rasp against infected flesh. A fool's hope, she knew, even as she tried for stillness, was her only fragile shield. The faintest clink of metal on metal, a sound almost swallowed by the contented grunts and snuffles of the swine jostling around her, had in the pre-dawn stillness been an obscene trumpet call, a clear signal to the ever-watchful, finely tuned malevolence of her father, and by extension, redemption itself. A guttural roar her father's, a sound she knew as well as the harsh caw of the carrion crows that circled redemption, ripped through the frigid air. It was followed instantly by the sickening thud of his heavy, mud-caked boot against the pigpen's warped wooden slats, a percussion that rattled Clara's very bones and sent a fresh stab of fear through her. "Whelp thinks it can slither free, does it?" He'd snarled, his voice a ragged, rasping prelude to the punishment he so readily administered. The stiff, worn leather strap, the one he favored for its satisfying crack against young flesh, was already in his hand. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, a practiced defense teeth sinking hard into her lower lip to stifle the whimpers she knew would earn her an extra vicious blow. The strap whistled down not once, but 3-4 times each impact, a fiery sermon on her immutable place. Each stinging lash a fresh reminder of her sin, the sin of being. Now, as the first pale bruise-hued light of another desolate morning bled almost reluctantly across the frost-hardened ground, she lay absolutely still, and every muscle clenched, and the fresh bleeding welts burning fiercely beneath the ever-present chilling film of grime and pig filth that coated her starkly white flesh. Her skin, so unnaturally pale, seemed to highlight every mark, a constant gritty testament to wells long turned to dust, and hearts seemingly just as barren within redemption's cursed boundaries. Redemption, the name itself emblazoned on a weathered, crooked sign at the edge of the settlement, was a mordant irony. A cruel daily jest etched onto a landscape, where hope, if it ever dared to sprout, was a fragile desert bloom, invariably withered by the harsh winds of fear and superstition. Compassion here was a treasure hoarded jealously by the few deemed far too precious to spend on the likes of her Clara's arrival into this world. 7 desolate winters ago, beneath a vast, discolored sky that perpetually mirrored the land's muted despair, had been marked not by celebration, but by a collective chilling inhalation. A fearful whisper, it was said, had snaked like a viper through the poorly chinked, clappered houses, unnatural. Her torrent of hair, a startling, luminous silver that seemed to drink in even the weakest, most begrudging light, and throw it back with an almost ghostly sheen. And her eyes, the unsettling, vivid crimson of freshly spilled arterial blood, had been her immediate, irrevocable condemnation, curse. The word had slithered from the withered lips of the old women. Omen. Others had hissed, aberration. Preacher Thorne had declared his voice already then a powerful instrument of judgment, his pronouncements often delivered in public gatherings that served as much for intimidation as for spiritual guidance. The town's crone Elspeth, a woman whose stooped shadow seemed to cling to her even in broad daylight, and whose poultices and potions often smelled disturbingly of grave earth and things best left unnamed, had spat onto the dust with venomous precision. The very first day Clara's mother, veiled and trembling, had dared to carry the swaddled infant outside their miserable hovel, Elspeth had been observing the Miller cabin from afar, her gaze sharp as a hawk's. When Clara's mother emerged, Elspeth was suddenly there as if materialized from the dust itself. Marked, she had croaked, her own eyes like chips of polished obsidian, glinting with a knowing, almost hungry malice. The land feels such things. It always has. It'll want its due girl, and it always collects. Then more softly yet with chilling weight, she'd added, presenting a small, roughly woven effigy of straw and what looked like singed animal hair. Preacher says a containment ward might lessen the taint. For now, best her father ensure she doesn't stray from its influence. Clara's mother had recoiled, but Elspeth pressed the disturbing object into her trembling hand before melting back into the settlement's shadows. Her parting glance, not at the mother, but at the grimly silent figure of Clara's father, standing in the hovel's doorway. The words had been a prophecy, a judgment, and a terrifyingly subtle manipulation sinking deep into the fertile soil of the town's fear. A small boy, Thomas, no more than 5. His small frame, already angular and underfed, materialized now at the warped slats of the Pigpen. His face, usually smudged with plague grime, was today a mask of concentrated childish malevolence, devil spawn. He shrieked, his voice thin and shrill, parroting words he'd undoubtedly heard from his elders, a crudely sharpened rock launched from his small fist, striking Clara hard above her right eye. A fresh thread of crimson blood welled instantly and trickled warmly down her temple. She bit back a sound, her jaw clenched. Tears, she knew, were an invitation for her father's leather strap. Expressions of pain were a luxury she could not afford. Her mother, a woman whose face was a deeply etched roadmap of hardship and silent, eroding suffering, would flinch if their flesh accidentally brushed, as if Clara's very essence were a physical contagion. Her father, a gaunt, severe man, consumed by his own bitterness, his eyes the dull, chipped color of flint, looked upon her with the weary disgust one reserves for a persistent, crop-devouring blight. The Pigpen, with its reeking mud and indifferent swine, was Clara's nursery, her playground, her inescapable prison. Each night, the heavy iron chain was secured around her slender, scarred ankle, then padlocked to a thick wooden post. So the devil won't wander and spoil what little good is left us. Her father would grunt, his voice flat, each word a chisel blow, his eyes never quite meeting hers, always looking through her as if she were already fading. He never considered that the devil was already entrenched in redemption, not in his tormented daughter, but in the cold, fearful hearts of its people, and perhaps most intimately within his own. The other children frequently gathered outside the pen, their taunts. Ghost child, see her devil eyes. Witchling formed a merciless chorus. Their words, flung like poisoned darts, were often more painful than the stones and clods of dung-laced dirt that inevitably followed Elias Thorne. The town's preacher, a man whose resonant voice could fill the stark church with the thunder of damnation, had publicly and repeatedly proclaimed her Satan's earthly vessel, a siphon for the land's misfortunes. His pronouncements were like sparks dropped onto the dry tinder of the town's fear, forging Clara's condemnation into immutable truth. A truth that many seemed almost eager to embrace. To show her kindness was to risk becoming an outcast. A fleeting smile directed her way could mean Clara went without scraps for days, her father meticulously noting any deviation from communal censure. A sob was invariably met with a brutal beating from him, a lesson in stoic endurance learned long before she could walk. Her sustenance consisted of leavings often half-rotten tossed into the hog's trough. She would snatch these furtively, wolfing them down with desperate speed. Speech was a forbidden territory her voice feared to carry demonic incantations. Or perhaps it was just another method to sever her human connection, to make her less. Occasionally, she would whisper words to the pigs, desperate syllables just to hear a voice that wasn't sharp with hate, to remember the shape of sounds other than shrieks and snarls. Dreams were a luxury she dared not indulge, for waking brought reality crashing back with unbearable weight. Her sensory world splintered wood, the constant chill of the iron chain, the pervasive stench of manure and decay, and overlaid the palpable miasma of an entire town's unwavering hatred. Her only sin was being born as she was. Then one bitter winter afternoon the sky lowered ominously, a ferocious blizzard brewing for days in the distant mountains descended upon redemption with sudden, blinding fury. Into this elemental maelstrom rode Silas McCrae. Silas, a lean, sinewy man, his face a testament to too much sun wind and lonely miles, was attempting to deliver a dwindling herd southwards. The storm's untamed ferocity forced him to seek grudging shelter in redemption, a town whose grim reputation had preceded it. Steer clear of redemption. An old-timer had warned, his voice raspy. There's a coldness there that ain't just the weather, son. It's in the marrow of the place. As he approached the outskirts, even before seeing the crooked sign, Silas witnessed a chilling tableau that confirmed the old-timer's words. In the snow-swept, wind-swept semblance of a town square, Preacher Thorne, a figure of imposing severity, was addressing a huddled knot of townspeople. His voice, amplified by the wind, carried across the desolate space. My flock, the Lord tests us with hardship. Our lands yield less, our livestock sicken. But these trials are a calling, a true sacrifice, a willing surrender. A cleansing of the unnatural taint among us shall bring forth his blessing and renew this earth. The canker that saps our strength must be cut out, purged from our midst, lest we all wither. Silas, reining in his horse at the edge of the gathering, felt a prickle of unease at the fervent, almost hungry gleam in Thorne's eyes, and the chilling implication of his words. This wasn't merely a sermon. It felt like an indictment, a dark promise hanging in the freezing air. As Silas attempted to secure his horse in the town's ramshackle livery, he felt an immediate, pervasive chill that had little to do with the biting wind. The livery owner, Jebediah Jeb, Scallows, a sullen, burly man with suspicious, close-set eyes, barely met his gaze, offering only curt monosyllables. His handshake was limp, cold like a dead fish. A tension gripped the very air, palpable and unnerving. Something Silas, a man accustomed to the raw edge of frontier life, hadn't felt in years. Not since. He pushed the thought away, the old wound aching like a phantom limb. He was paying for the stall when a commotion near the town's ice-rimmed well caught his attention. He saw Jeb's daughter Martha, a girl barely on the cusp of womanhood, her face thin and pale, attempting to draw water. A group of loutish youths taunted her. One bolder than the others shoved her hard. Martha stumbled, dropping her bucket, which clattered on the frozen ground. Heard your ma talking soft about the thing in Miller's Pigpen. Martha, one youth sneered, his face contorted with a borrowed malice. Saying it ain't right. Best watch your tongue, girl, and tell her to watch hers, lest you both want to be drawing water for the hogs yourself. Or worse. The threat was unmistakable, laced with a smug certainty of impunity. Martha flushed crimson, then paled, but said nothing quickly. Retrieving her bucket and retreating, her shoulders slumped. Later, Silas overheard a brief, harsh exchange between Martha and her father inside the livery. Martha, I told you, stay clear of any talk about that Miller creature. Jeb hissed, his voice low and urgent, laced with a fear that seemed too profound for the situation. Thorne's word is law here. What he says goes. You question him. You question all of us. Martha's reply was a choked whisper. But father, she's just a child, innocent. What if... What if the preacher's misguided, even wrong? What if Elspeth feeds him poison? Jeb's hand shot out, gripping her arm so tightly she winced. Wrong. Don't you dare breathe such heresy. We do what we must to survive this harsh land. Elspeth knows the old ways, ways Thorn has seen fit to embrace for our salvation. You'd do well to etch that into your heart, girl, and keep your foolish compassion locked away, lest it be carved out of you. The casual cruelty, the palpable fear woven into the fabric of daily life, and the mention of Elspeth guiding Thorn tightened something old and cold in Silas's chest. It reminded him too keenly of other towns, other fears and injustices he'd witnessed, and to his lasting regret had sometimes failed to confront. He recalled whispers of prairie fever, turning to outright condemnation. His own Sarah, her eyes burning bright with sickness, then his Mary. The old wounds throbbed a familiar agony. Later that afternoon, needing to draw water for his horse from that same communal well, situated perilously close to a small dilapidated farm on the settlement's northern edge, the very farm the youth had mentioned. The driving snow parted for a fleeting moment. Through a narrow gap between the Pigpen's weathered boards, Silas saw them. At first, only her eyes, two luminous points of startling incandescent crimson, impossibly bright against a spectral bone-white face. Delicate silver lashes dusted with snowflakes framed them. But it was the expression captured within those eyes that seized him, that stopped his breath. They were haunted, hollowed by suffering, reflecting a despair so profound it felt like a physical blow, a despair mixed with a flickering, almost extinguished spark of defiance. He recognized, within their depths, he saw a silent, desperate plea, a yearning so raw it tore at something deep within him. He remembered Sarah, her small body consumed by fever, her unique quiet knowingness twisted by fearful whispers into something sinister before the sickness provided a convenient explanation. That crushing helplessness, that impotent rage against unreasoning superstition surged anew in Silas's breast, hot and fierce. That single image, the crimson eyes burning in the swirling snow, branded itself onto Silas's mind. He was a man of few words, weathered by hardship. But the suffering he glimpsed demanded more than pity. It cried out for action, subtle inquiries over the next few tense hours as the storm raged, confirmed the chilling narrative of the cursed child. He listened, his face impassive, as townsfolk voices, flat eyes averted or flicking towards Preacher Thorn's church, spoke of her as if she were a blight, a necessary burden. In the general store, old Elspeth mended a fishing net, clutching a small, grotesque wooden token around her neck. A miniature carving of a bound figure, its features rubbed smooth with age. When Silas casually mentioned the Miller farm, seeking directions to it under some pretext, Elspeth's dark eyes narrowed, boring into him. Preacher Thorn. He guides us true. She quavered, her voice like dry leaves skittering over stone. He understands the ways of the Lord and the ways of the land. He says the land has needs ancient, needs stranger, and the Almighty provides ways to meet him, best not to question God's paths, nor what the good earth demands for its quiet sustenance. Some things are unclean, and unclean things must be managed for the good of the flock. Her words, steeped in fearful superstition and an undercurrent of chilling satisfaction, prickled with dread. As she spoke, Silas noticed Martha enter the store, her face drawn, a basket on her arm. Elspeth beckoned her curtly, her voice sharp. "Girl, fetch me more of that shadow root from behind the church and the dried nightshade, and mind you don't bruise the moon fern. Be quick." Martha flinched almost imperceptibly at the mention of the herbs, her eyes darting nervously toward Silas, then nodded silently and slipped out her movements, furtive. Silas filed away this detail. Her apparent servitude to Elspeth, coupled with her father's harshness, planted a seed of deep mistrust concerning the town's core. Another woman in the store, younger, her hands raw from lie, whispered, "Preacher Thorn." He says such. Burdens must be contained, kept pure like for the good of us all. The land has been harded. It takes its toll, crops fail, livestock sickens. Preacher says there's always a reason, always a price. Sometimes hard choices must be made. Takes its toll, Silas thought, filing it away with growing horror. Kept pure, what did that mean? He'd also noticed with deep revulsion a crudely carved wooden effigy tucked into an alcove by the church's side door. Larger than he first realized, disturbingly child-sized, it depicted a stylized, bound figure. Its eyes were wide, hollowed sockets. Around its neck, a withered garland of what he now recognized with a sickening lurch as deadly nightshade berries. The very same Elspeth had sent Martha to fetch, at its base, dark reddish-brown stains he'd initially dismissed as mud or paint. Now those stains took on a far more sinister sheen. Even before knowing of Clara, the totem had struck him as unsettling, a palpable undercurrent of some older, darker faith lurking beneath redemption's harsh Christian piety. The memory, coupled with Elspeth's pronouncements and the town's casual cruelty, felt like a key turning in a rusted, blood-soaked lock. He'd seen such carvings before, in a place best forgotten, a place that stank of fear and smoke and something infinitely worse, where prayers were offered not to heaven, but to the shadowed earth beneath that night, as the blizzard reached its howling apogee under the deafening cover of the screaming wind. Silas made his way back to the Miller farm. The ancient lock on the Pigpen gate, already weakened by rot, yielded with a protesting groan to a sharp kick from his boot. Inside, amidst the grunting swine, Clara, a small huddled shape, flinched violently, scrambling backward until the chain pulled her up short with a brutal jerk, her crimson eyes wide in the gloom, filled with instinctual terror. The chain clinked ominously as she shifted, a sound that seemed to echo the beating of his own heart. He knelt, ignoring the reeking filth, his voice a low murmur, attempting to cut through years of abuse. "I'm not going to hurt you, child. I'm here to help." He reached out slowly, fumbling with the frozen shackle. The iron was bitingly cold, the mechanism crusted with rust and grime. But he persisted, his fingers growing numb, until with a final grating click, it sprang open. Clara gasped a tiny broken sound, her eyes fixed on his face in utter disbelief, as if seeing a ghost or an angel in this hellish place. He lifted her. She was terrifyingly light, a bundle of sharp bones and palpable fear, yet offered no resistance. Her small body rigid with shock. Perhaps he thought grimly there was no fight left, or perhaps the unexpected gentleness had kindled a fragile, bewildered hope. He swiftly unwrapped his thick sheepskin coat, heavily caked with snow, and enveloped her trembling frame. He swung himself onto his horse, settled her carefully before him, and urged the animal out of redemption's hateful confines, riding hard into the teeth of the raging blizzard toward the uncertain sanctuary of his remote cabin. The wind shrieked a furious pursuit, like the voices of the damned. But Silas held Clara tight, his resolve a silent bulwark against the storm without, and the hatred they had left behind. The journey was a brutal crucible. Snow blinded him, stinging his face like thousands of tiny needles. The wind clawed its voice, a ceaseless, mournful howl threatening to rip them from the saddle. The cold leached their warmth, a deadly, insidious seep. Clara, nestled in his coat, trembled uncontrollably, her breath catching in small, terrified sobs that were almost lost in the storm's roar. Silas spoke intermittently, his voice rough but steady. "Almost there, little one. Warm fire soon. You're safe now. Just hold on." He was unsure if she understood the words, if any kindness could penetrate the wall of her suffering. But he spoke them anyway, a mantra against the darkness for her, and in some unacknowledged way for himself, memories of his lost children, of Sarah's bright, burning fever. And the fear in Mary's eyes swirled with the snow, hardening his resolve into something unbreakable, as a frozen gray dawn painted the sky in hues of lead and despair. They reached his cabin, a small, sturdy structure, a haven of rough-hewn logs, with a welcome plume of smoke from its stone chimney, a beacon in the frozen waste. Inside, the sudden warmth was almost painful, a shock to their chilled bodies. He gently set Clara on a worn rag rug before the crackling fire. Her clothes, tattered rags, filthy and frozen, clung to her. Her skin beneath the grime was so pale it was almost translucent. A vivid, horrifying patchwork of old and new bruises, welts, and the raw, infected sores on her ankle. Her wide, luminous crimson eyes, pupils dilated in the sudden light, slowly took in the rustic interior. The simple wooden table, the rough-hewn chairs, the bookshelf crammed with worn volumes. A universe removed from her squalid cage, Silas moved with quiet efficiency. He found an old, clean woolen shirt of his own, much too large but soft and warm. He helped her, his touch remarkably gentle for a man whose hands were calloused by years of hard labor, out of her wet, stinking rags, averting his eyes to give her what little dignity he could. He carefully washed the grime from her pale face and trembling hands with warm water from a kettle. Clara endured his ministrations with a strange, unnerving passivity. Her gaze fixed on his weathered face, searching as if trying to decipher the enigma of his unmerited kindness. Her small body flinching almost imperceptibly at every touch, however gentle. When he cleansed the crusted blood from the cut above her eye, a single tear escaped and traced a path through the dirt on her cheek. He fed her hot, nourishing stew rich with wild game and dried vegetables. She ate slowly at first, her movements hesitant, as if expecting the food to be snatched away. Then with a sudden, desperate, almost feral ravenousness that tore at Silas's heart, her small hands clutching the bowl, as if it were life itself. Afterwards he made a makeshift bed of blankets and furs near the hearth. Exhaustion profound and bone-deep finally claimed her, and she fell into a deep, troubled sleep, punctuated by whimpers and restless twitches, her small fists clenching and unclenching. Silas sat by the fire, long that night, watching her, the flickering light playing over her silver hair spread out on the furs, the chafed, infected marks on her ankle, her skeletal thinness, the haunted look that clung to her even in slumber. These fueled a cold, simmering anger at redemption at her parents, especially her father's casual daily brutality, at Preacher Thorne, at Elspeth, at every silent bystander who had allowed this horror to fester. He had pulled her from the mire, but its darkness still clung to her, and he suspected with growing dread that it clung to the town itself, nurtured by something far older and more insidious than simple cruelty. He thought of the bound totem, the nightshade, Elspeth's talk of the land needing sustenance and keeping the unclean pure. A dreadfully familiar pattern began to assert itself in his mind, a pattern woven from half-forgotten whispers, from another cursed place, another child deemed different. Days unfolded with a slow, quiet rhythm cocooned by the fading blizzard. The world outside was a pristine, silent expanse of white. Clara remained wary, a feral creature slowly, hesitantly emerging from a dark den, her voice seemingly lost, swallowed by years of enforced silence. Silas was endlessly patient, creating an atmosphere of safety, a sanctuary of gentle routine. He moved, slowly, spoke softly, never approaching her without first letting her see him, never looming. He cooked simple, hearty meals, ensuring she always had enough, placing the food gently before her and waiting for her to reach for it. He kept the fire blazing, a bulwark against the lingering chill. He mended her tattered clothes as best he could, and in the long, snowbound evenings read aloud from his battered books, poems of beauty and sorrow, adventure stories of faraway lands, historical accounts of courage against overwhelming odds. He hoped the cadence of a human voice, speaking words of wonder, not hate, would soothe the hidden wounds, would coax her spirit back from the abyss. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to emerge. One bright morning, as sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window, she pointed a hesitant, trembling finger towards a chickadee, pecking at a frozen berry on a branch outside Bee-Bird. She whispered, her voice raspy from disuse, little more than a breath. Silas smiled a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Yes, Clara, that's a bird. A brave little fellow, isn't he, out in the cold?" She watched it for a long moment, her crimson eyes wide and troubled, then lifted them to his, "He free?" She asked, the words struggling from her lips. Silas's heart clenched. He knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "Yes, Clara, he's free. He can fly wherever he wants. And so are you now. You're free too. No more chains, little one." He paused, then seeing the raw fear and confusion in her eyes, added softly, "Your hair," he said, reaching out a tentative hand, but stopping short of touching it. "It's like starlight on snow, beautiful. And your eyes, they're not a curse, Clara. They're like the deepest sunset after a storm, or precious rubies, rare and special. There's nothing wrong with being different." The first time he said it, she flinched, pulling back as if from a blow, but he repeated it gently in the quiet days that followed, especially when he helped her with infinite patience, brushed the tangles from her luminous hair, which seemed to absorb and reflect the firelight with an ethereal glow. Another day, she woke with a strangled cry from a nightmare, her small body rigid, her eyes wide with unspeakable terror. Cold, chain, dark, father, preacher, blood. She whimpered the words, tumbling out in a torrent of remembered horror, each one a fresh wound. "Shh, Clara, you're safe." Silas reassured her, his hand resting gently on her trembling shoulder. "It was just a dream, a bad memory. No more chains, no more darkness. You're safe here with me, I promise. No one will hurt you again." "Why?" The word, raw disbelieving, tore from her fragile throat. "Why are you not like them? Why help Clara?" Her eyes searched his, desperate for an answer to this impossible kindness. Silas paused, the weight of his own past pressing down on him. "Because no child should know what you've known, Clara, because sometimes a man's just gotta do what's right, even when it's hard, and because—" His face softened, a deep sadness in his eyes. "I see a brave spirit in you, not a curse. A long time ago." His voice dropped, a shadow passing over his face. "I couldn't help someone very dear to me. My Sarah, the fear in that place. It was like a sickness, same as redemption. They whispered about her too. I wasn't strong enough then. I didn't understand the depths of their poison. I won't fail again, Clara. Not you." He began to teach her words, then letters traced with charcoal on smooth pieces of bark. She was surprisingly intelligent, a quick learner once her overwhelming fear began to recede. Her mind, a fertile field starved for nourishment. He taught her kindness through unwavering, gentle action. He never raised his voice, never made a sudden move that might startle her. Trust, a fragile seedling sprouted in the barren soil of her trauma. A tentative smile would sometimes grace her lips, fleeting as a winter sunbeam. She started to ask questions, her voice gaining strength and clarity each day. Questions about the world outside the pigpen, about the animals in his books, about him, Silas. She asked one evening, staring into the mesmerizing dance of the fire, her small face serious. "Were you always alone?" He looked at the flames, the memories flickering within them. "No, little one. Once I had a family, a wife, Mary, and a daughter, Sarah, like you. She was special, different, bright as a new coin. The prairie fever took them. The settlement, they were good folk mostly, but fear twisted them into something ugly. They called it a contagion. But the real contagion was their terror, their superstition. They wouldn't help. Left us, isolated. He didn't mention the whispers, then the darker fears that had surrounded Sarah even before the fever whispers, about her uncanny calm. Her strangely knowing gaze, her ability to soothe agitated animals. Whispers fanned by a woman much like Elspeth, who spoke of unnatural influences. My mother. Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. She would not touch me, even her shadow, ran from me. Some people are too lost in their own fear and bitterness, little one. It makes them blind and cruel. It wasn't your fault, never your fault. He shared tales of vast prairies stretching to the horizon, of towering mountains that scraped the sky, of the profound solitude of the trail. He spoke of loss, gently, carefully, hoping she'd understand that pain was a part of life, but not its entirety, that light could exist alongside darkness. He saw the deep, invisible scars on her soul. Knew that healing would be a long, arduous journey. But here in this small cabin, Clara mattered. She was seen, heard, cared for. And in saving her, Silas felt a dormant part of himself reawaken, a flicker of warmth in the desolate landscape of his own grief. He even found himself humming old trail songs, melodies he thought long forgotten. One evening, Clara looked up from the crude drawing she was making with charcoal on a piece of bark. What song is that, Silas? It sounds like water running. Her simple, normal question filled him with a quiet, profound warmth, yet a cold, unyielding anger over redemption's calculated cruelty simmered within Silas. He couldn't hide Clara forever, nor should he. The town, its dark heart, needed to be lanced. He began to piece together fragmented information. Redemption's consistent history of misfortunes, failing crops, sick livestock. Preacher Thorn's intensifying influence, amplified by Elspeth's insidious whispers of ancient rights and the land's demands. The crude totem by the church, the nightshade, the suspicious stains, Elspeth's chilling words about sustenance and managing, the unclean, for the good of the flock. It all pricked at his memory, with an awful dawning clarity. What was its true purpose? An encounter with an old, weathered trapper. Jedediah Smith, on a rare supply run to a distant trading post, confirmed his deepest, most terrifying unease. Silas had reluctantly left Clara with Jedediah and his kind, quiet wife, Martha. A different, older Martha, her face a map of gentle kindness, whom he trusted, implicitly. Redemption. Jedediah spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the snow, his eyes narrowed with grim recollection. Thornstown, and old Elspeth's foul nest, heard tell of her for years back. Another child there. Strange one, they said, pale as a ghost. Hair like silver thread, odd eyes like sunset. Lily, her name, was vanished one harsh winter, same as this one, Thorn. And the parents claimed they'd packed up and moved on, seeking better fortunes, but no one saw 'em leave. No wagon tracks in the spring thaw, just gone. Swallowed by the damn blizzard, they said. Thorn talks sweet salvation, but his eyes, they hold a hungrier fire, a zealot's blaze, and old Elspeth she whispers of. Old ways. Ancient appeasements. Of blood for the soil when the land turns sour and unproductive. Some say Thorn believes the ground itself thirsts, and Elspeth, she's the one who tells him how to quench it. Appeasements. Blood for the soil. The phrases sent an icy shiver down Silas's spine, echoing Elspeth's own veiled threats. Thorn's branding of Clara as Satan's vessel. Her father's nightly ritual so the devil won't wander. What if Clara was marked for something far worse than mere ostracization and abuse? What if vanishing was redemption's ultimate horrifying solution for children like her? The chilling similarity to the insidious whispers that had surrounded his own Sarah, even before the fever provided a natural and convenient end, was too stark too horrifying to ignore. Driven by a terrible, sickening premonition, Silas journeyed to the dusty county records office, a good 2-day ride. After nearly 2 full days, sifting through brittle ledgers and faded ink, his fingers stained and his heart heavy with dread, he found its scant, suspiciously vague records of 2 other infants, born decades apart in redemption, with chillingly familiar peculiar traits. Unnatural pallor, eyes of strange color, hair like moonlight. Both entries curtly marked deceased, farming accident, or family moved away. No grave markers listed, no corroborating details of departure, no destinations recorded. They had simply ceased to exist in the official record, as if erased. The horrifying, grotesque picture coalesced with sickening clarity. A history of recurring misfortunes in redemption thorns, messianic and manipulative influence. Elspeth's intimate knowledge of pagan rites, the repeated disappearances of different children, coinciding with harsh times, the persistent rumors of appeasements, the pagan totem adorned with nightshade, desperate landowners facing ruin, a fanatical preacher offering a dark Old Testament-style solution, and an ancient crone providing the ritualistic knowledge, the how-to of unspeakable acts. This wasn't random cruelty. This was organized, monstrous evil, a recurring pattern of ritual sacrifice. He had to return. Clara was safe for now, but the pattern would continue. Others would not be. He rode back to redemption under a moonless, oppressive night and the stars obscured by a low, menacing cloud cover. The town was shrouded in an unnerving quiet. The church stood silhouetted against the bruised sky, its steeple a dark, accusatory finger pointing towards a heaven that seemed to have forsaken this place. His attention was drawn, as if by some grim magnet, to the rear of the churchyard, to a disused, crumbling outdoor baptismal pit he'd noticed earlier. Moss covered its stone edges, cracked and broken. It was now conspicuously covered by a heavy, newly placed wooden lid. Fresh earth piled untidily around its edges, a faint, cloyingly sweet, yet musty, sickly odor emanated from it, mingled with something acrid metallic and faintly burnt. The same cloying, disturbing scent that clung to Elspeth's hut and the nightshade garland on the totem. The hairs on the back of his neck rose, a trap door to hell, right in God's supposed backyard. With considerable effort, his muscles straining, he pried the heavy lid open just enough to slip inside. A stronger wave of the vile odor wafted out, and an unnatural bone-deep chill seemed to emanate from the pit itself, a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. He struck a lucifer, the tiny flame flickering precariously. No water. Only recently disturbed earth, packed down unevenly, showing signs of recent frantic digging. His heart hammered against his ribs. Armed with a small spade he'd brought from his saddlebag, he began to dig. As his spade first bit into the damp soil, a low, indistinct murmur like a collective sigh or a drawn-out, mournful whisper seemed to drift on the still air, originating from no discernible source. He told himself it was the wind rustling through the pines beyond the churchyard. Though not a single leaf stirred on the trees, the soil was dense, heavy. Every scrape of the spade echoed in the suffocating silence. Then the spade struck something soft, yielding then, dull, sickeningly brittle. Dropping to his knees, his breath catching in his throat, he clawed at the soil with bare hands, uncaring of the filth. A small, fragile bone emerged. A child's rib, then another and another. The delicate, tiny, almost complete skeletal remains of a very young child curled in a fetal position, as if asleep. Tangled in the dirt and rootlets near the tiny skull, a shred of homespun linen once blue, and a single crudely carved wooden bird, its paint, long-faded lily. Sweet merciful heavens, he breathed bile rising in his throat, the horror of it threatening to overwhelm him. A dry, rasping cackle like stones grinding together sliced the silence. The earth always takes its tithe, traveler, always, and I am its humble collector, its devoted handmaiden. Silas whirled spade, clutched defensively like a weapon. Elspeth stood at the pit's edge, silhouetted against the faint light spilling from the sacristy window. In her gnarled hand, a razor-sharp crescent-bladed reaping hook glinted malevolently. Her obsidian eyes, like those of a bird of prey, gleamed with an inhuman triumph and a chilling possessive hunger. Took you long enough to find the Lord's most secret garden, outlander. These special flowers, they bloom best in consecrated soil, fed by true faith and willing sacrifice. Her voice was a low, gloating hiss, and sometimes by the unwilling if they prove troublesome. Before Silas could react, Preacher Thorn burst from the sacristy door, his face a contorted mask of righteous fury flanked by two hulking figures. Gresham, the wealthy landowner whose crops had miraculously thrived last season, his face pale and sweating in the cold, and Jeb Scallows, the livery owner, Martha's father, his usual sullen expression hardened into one of grim resolve, both gripped heavy axe handles. Thorn himself brandished an ornate, heavy iron candlestick, its base darkly stained with what Silas now knew was not altar wine. Elspeth, my devoted sister in faith. Thorn hissed his voice, a venomous rasp that scraped Silas's nerves raw. It seems our unwelcome guest has an unhealthy curiosity about matters that do not concern him. The Lord's most sacred work must be protected. These are not mere burials, you ignorant fool. These are investments, sacrifices, McCrae, holy sacrifices to ensure redemption's bounty, to appease a righteous demanding God, those children. Abominations, thorns in Providence's side, weeds in the Lord's vineyard, offered for the greater good, for the survival of the flock. He lunged the heavy candlestick raised murderously, aiming for Silas's head. Silas barely sidestepped. The candlestick smashed against the pit's stone edge, showering sparks and chips of stone. He brought the spade up in a desperate arc, parrying another wild downward blow from Thorn. Elspeth cackled a sound of pure, unadulterated malice, darting low like a venomous spider, with the reaping hook aiming for his legs. Silas stamped hard near her foot, the impact jarring up his leg, forcing her back for a crucial second. And with a heave, wrenched the heavy wooden lid from the pit's edge, holding it like a crude makeshift shield. The next sweep of Elspeth's hook bit deeply into the wood. With a sickening thud, the blade momentarily stuck. The two landowners, Gresham and Jeb, charged, their faces grim, their eyes devoid of mercy. "You're murderers, butchers of children. You defile the name of God." Silas spat fury momentarily, eclipsing his fear. The spade swung like a club, connected with Gresham's arm with a sickening crack. The landowner grunted in pain, stumbling back. Salvation demands a blood price. The land thirsts. Thorn shrieked, his face a mask of unholy rage, his eyes rolling wildly as he stumbled on the uneven ground near the pit's edge. Silas saw his opening kicked out hard, his heavy boot connecting squarely with Thorn's shins. The preacher yelped in pain, and surprise, dropping the candlestick, plunging them into deeper, more confusing shadow. But Thorn, fueled by a fanatical rabid strength, was on his feet again in an instant. He scrambled toward Silas, not bothering with the lost candlestick, but with his bare outstretched hands, fingers curled into claws, reaching, grappling. Silas, still half in the shallow grave, his footing precarious on the loose earth, felt himself losing ground. Thorn surprisingly agile. For his bulk lunged his weight, pressing Silas down, trying to force him further into the pit, roaring, "You will join them, defiler. You will sanctify this ground with your unclean blood. You will become part of redemption's bounty." As they grappled, Silas slammed his heel backward into the crumbling edge of the pit, dislodging a shower of earth and loose stones that momentarily caused Thorn to slip, breaking his iron hold. Elspeth, seeing her chance, as Thorn momentarily faltered, circled like a starving wolf on the reaping hook, a silver blur in the dim light. She feinted high, drawing Silas's guard up, then swept low with terrifying speed. Silas twisted desperately, but the hook tore through his trouser leg, drawing a burning line of fire across his calf. He grunted in pain, pushing Thorn back with a desperate shove. The preacher reeled, his eyes wild with murder. Thorn, regaining his balance, roared into the night, his voice regaining its pulpit thunder, trying to rally unseen aid. Blasphemer townsfolk of redemption. To me, to arms. He attacks your shepherd. He desecrates hallowed ground. He uncovers what must remain buried for the good of us all. A distant door banged open. Confused shouts, and then angrier ones began to echo from the direction of the town. The frantic, irregular clangor of the church bell began to toll. An erratic, panicked summons slicing through the night. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Silas. He had seconds no more. He didn't hesitate, hands scrabbling frantically in the disturbed soil of the grave. He scooped up a handful of the small damning bones. His fingers closed around something else. A heavily worn, leather-bound Bible tucked beside the remains, smelling of mildew and that acrid burnt herb scent. Quickly he flicked it open. Tucked within its pages were several scorched, oddly shaped candles of dark, greasy wax, and a small, crudely drawn folded map of the church grounds, the baptismal pit marked with a dripping bloody cross, Thorn's vile playbook. Elspeth's chilling words from earlier echoed in his mind. Your own father knew her purpose, stranger. He tended the lamb for the slaughter as others did before him for Lily and for the one before her. Thorn, scrambling up, added his voice thick with fanaticism. He understood as few did the sacred art of preparation. The full horror of Clara's father's calculated cruelty crashed down on Silas Thorn, was scrambling up from his stumble, cursing vilely. You won't leave here alive. The earth will drink your heathen blood, and we will be blessed. Gresham and Jeb, recovered, were closing in again, and their faces murderous. Elspeth, a wiry, relentless predator, circled the reaping hook, held ready for a final killing strike. This was it. He was trapped between the fanatics and the open grave. He looked at the fragile bones clutched in his hand, then at Thorn. With a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, he lunged upwards, not out of the pit, but towards Thorn, using the preacher's own aggressive momentum against him. He rammed his shoulder hard into Thorn's midsection. The preacher, surprised by the sudden, savage counterattack from below, grunted the air, leaving his lungs in a rush, losing his balance on the slippery, crumbling edge of the pit. For a horrifying suspended second, they swayed, locked in a grotesque, macabre dance on the precipice of the open grave. Then, with a despairing, gurgling yell, Thorn toppled backwards into the shallow pit, landing with a sickening thud among the dislodged earth and unseen by him in the darkness. Lily's fragile, scattered remains, Elspeth shrieked a sound of pure, animalistic fury and lunged with the hook. Silas, already scrambling out the other side of the pit, felt a searing pain as the razor tip grazed his forearm, laying it open. He saw approaching lanterns bobbing at the edge of the churchyard, coming fast. There by the pit. Thorn's in trouble, get him! A rough voice bellowed. He bolted not towards the growing crowd, but deeper among the shadowy tombstones and the evidence clutched tightly. The ground was uneven, treacherous. Thorn was already bellowing from the pit, his voice muffled but filled with panicked rage. Stop him! He knows he has the proof. Don't let him escape redemption. Lantern light converged near the pit. He ducked behind a large, ornate mausoleum as a figure Jeb Scallows burst from between two shadowed crypts, a pitchfork now glinting wickedly in his hands, its tines aimed for Silas's heart. Silas wrenched himself sideways with a desperate grunt. The tines scraped heavily against the stone inches from his face, sending sparks flying, trapped. He was utterly trapped, and then a single dimmer shielded lantern near the distant livery stables. Martha, Jeb's daughter. He'd misjudged her earlier. Her errands for Elspeth were clearly coerced by her brutal father and the crone's iron will. Her lantern flashed not towards him, but twice quickly towards a narrow, refuse-strewn laneway that ran behind the stables, a dark slash between buildings. A desperate, incredibly risky signal. He saw a faint, fleeting image in his mind of Martha Younger, her face pale with a fear that wasn't just of the crone, but of the sinister purpose for which those herbs were gathered, her small hands trembling as Elspeth supervised. This was her atonement, her rebellion. He fainted left, drawing a shout from Gresham, who was now armed with a recovered axe handle, then pivoted and sprinted with all his might towards the indicated laneway, dodging blindly among the tombstones. A shot rang out, the musket ball whizzing past his head with a vicious hum, tearing a hole through his hat brim. He reached his tethered horse, his bloodied, trembling fingers fumbling desperately with the reins. As he vaulted heavily into the saddle, Gresham and another man burst from the darkness, hands outstretched to grab him. Silas kicked out with his good leg, his heavy boot connecting solidly with Gresham's shoulder, sending him stumbling back with a howl of pain. He kicked his heels savagely, urging the startled horse into a headlong gallop down the dark, narrow laneway. At the far end, a rough barricade of overturned barrels and broken crates loomed, blocking his path. Hastily erected, no time to stop, no time to turn. Yeah, he yelled, leaning low over the horse's neck, trusting the animal's strength and instinct. The horse, a powerful, courageous beast, gathered itself and leaped, soaring over the obstacle with a jarring thud on the other side, but scraping its flank badly on a protruding piece of timber. They burst past a hastily unlatched back gate, Martha's desperate doing, he was certain, and out towards the dark, open road leading east. Shouts and the pounding feet of pursuers followed close behind. Then the terrifying, deep-throated baying of a hound, released from somewhere near the edge of town. It was gaining on them, its howls chillingly close. Silas pushed his injured horse harder, the animal groaning with effort, and the sound of the pursuing dog, growing louder, closer with every second. He saw a dilapidated, half-collapsed bridge ahead, spanning a shallow, fast-flowing, ice-choked creek. Too risky to cross on horseback at this speed, especially with an injured animal. He veered sharply off the road, dismounting in a run and slapping his horse's rump hard, sending it careening riderless into the darkness. Scrambling frantically down the muddy, slippery bank, he plunged into the shockingly icy water, the cold stealing his breath, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. He pressed himself into the deep shadows beneath the decaying, moss-covered timbers of the bridge. The frigid water swirling around his waist, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, his breath sawing in his chest, every muscle screaming in protest. Moments later, which felt like an eternity, he heard the heavy footfalls of men and the frantic, excited sniffing of the hound on the bank, directly above him, mere feet from his precarious hiding place. Torches cast grotesque dancing shadows on the underside of the bridge, and the swirling water lost him, damn it to hell. A voice Jeb Scallows snarled in frustration. Spread out, check the creek. He can't have gone far. Thorn will have our hides if he gets away with what he knows. Silas held his breath, pressing himself further into the numbing cold of the creek, and the slimy timbers praying the darkness and the scent of the fast-flowing water would conceal him. After an eternity of agonizing suspense, the sounds of the search party receded as they moved further down the creek. He rode not west to Jedediah's, exposing them to danger, but hard east towards the distant territorial capital, pushing his lathered horse, which he thankfully recovered a mile down the road, calmed by, then though favoring its injured flank, fueled by a potent cocktail of fury, grief, and the horrifying, undeniable weight of the evidence, clutched in his trembling, bloodied hand. The small, fragile bones, the scorched candles, Thorn's defiled Bible, the damning map, his only weapons now against an entire town steeped in monstrous darkness. Clara, he knew with chilling certainty, had been next her name, whispered in the wind, destined for the pit. A ritual sacrifice. He could almost hear the clink of her chain being removed for the last time. The soft thud of a spade striking fresh earth, waiting. Marshal Thompson, a stout man with weary, seen-it-all eyes and a formidable walrus mustache, listened with initial deeply ingrained skepticism as Silas, travel-stained, hollow-eyed, injured, and reeking of creek water, and something indefinably foul laid out his nightmarish, almost unbelievable tale. Skepticism wavered, then visibly crumbled to horrified disbelief as Silas carefully unwrapped his grim burden on the marshal's cluttered desk and the child's fragile bones, the grotesquely scorched candles, the defiled blood-annotated Bible, the crudely drawn map marking the grave. This preacher, Elias Thorne. Silas stated, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion but a bone-deep weariness. And a crone named Elspeth weren't just preaching hate and superstition. They were orchestrating human sacrifices, children Marshall ritualistically murdered, to, as they believe, feed the soil and bring prosperity. The Marshal, a veteran of frontier brutality, who thought he'd seen the worst humanity had to offer, visibly paled. He summoned his deputy, a younger, harder man. Silas repeated his story, his voice cracking with exhaustion and the weight of his knowledge. "If what you say is true, McCrae," Thompson said, his voice heavy with shock and revulsion, "then this is an abomination beyond any reckoning I've encountered in 30 years of law-keeping." He immediately contacted Alistair Finch, a tenacious, sharp-witted journalist from the territorial capital's leading newspaper, known for his fearless investigative reporting. Finch arrived swiftly, his eyes bright with a mixture of professional interest and profound human revulsion as he heard the tale and saw the evidence. A few days later, a grim, heavily armed cavalcade rode into redemption under a leaden sky. Marshal Thompson, 6 grim-faced deputies, a shaky but resolute Silas, and the keenly observant Finch preacher Thorne, about to begin his Sunday sermon from the pulpit of his Stark church, feigned pious outrage at their intrusion. "This man is a liar, a blasphemer, a dangerous madman. He attacked me. He assaulted my flock. You have no authority here, Marshal. This is God's house." Elspeth, lurking near the pulpit, like a malevolent shadow, began a guttural keening chant in a language Silas didn't recognize, until Thompson silenced her with a glare that promised retribution. Several prominent townsmen, including the landowners Gresham and a still bruised Jeb Scallows, stood protectively near Thorne, their faces a mixture of defiance and barely concealed terror. Thompson was unmoved by Thorne's bluster. At the now guarded baptismal pit, roped off and under the watchful eyes of 2 deputies, before a growing silent crowd of pale-faced townsfolk, other deputies began to dig. Despite Thorne's frantic, high-pitched howls of desecration, sacrilege, "You will bring God's damnation down upon us all. The land will rebel." Finch's pencil flew across his notepad, capturing every detail, every nuance of fear and guilt. The silence among the onlookers grew suffocating, a heavy blanket of dread. The earth yielded its terrible secrets, not one but the identifiable remains of 2 small children, their fragile bones laid bare for all to see. A collective horrified gasp, a sound of dawning, sickening realization rippled through the assembled townspeople. Thorne's composure finally shattered. He began to babble incoherently of divine commands, visions from God, and the absolute necessity of the sacrifices to save redemption from famine and ruin, to appease an ancient pact with the land itself. His rambling, terrified words implicated prominent landowners by name, including the ashen-faced Gresham and a visibly trembling Jeb Scallows. Gresham, his face a mask of terror and betrayal, lunged forward, pointing a shaking finger at the preacher. "He's lying." Thorne twisted the Lord's words. He promised us prosperity. He said the land demanded it. A small price, Elspeth confirmed it. She showed him the old texts and the old ways. We were desperate. The blight was taking everything. Another landowner, a man known for his stern piety, slumped to his knees, sobbing. The preacher said it was God's will to cleanse the curse from amongst us. The first fruits, the special ones, belonged to the earth. Elspeth showed him how. Arrests were made. Thorn, bound in heavy iron chains, a bitter-fitting irony, was a broken, whimpering figure, his divine authority stripped away, revealing the craven monster beneath. Elspeth, her face a snarl of unrepentant, venomous hatred, spat curses and dark prophecies as deputies bound her gnarled wrists, her eyes still burning with a fanatic's fire. The complicit landowners, their masks of respectability torn away, looked like what they were: fearful, greedy men, ensnared in a demonic pact, their souls forfeit. Martha, the livery girl, was not among them. Finch later learned from a tight-lipped Jeb before he was taken away that she had fled redemption and the day after Silas's harrowing escape. Her awakened conscience, unable to bear the crushing weight of her town's sins and her father's monstrous involvement. It was whispered she'd left a letter for her disgraced father, confessing her forced, fearful participation in Elspeth's errands for potion ingredients. Her terrified observations of secret lamplit meetings between Thorn, Elspeth, and key landowners, and begging his forgiveness for not speaking out sooner, for not being brave enough to try and warn Silas more directly than her desperate, fleeting signal. The remaining townspeople watched in stunned, horrified silence, shame, terror, and a dawning, unbearable guilt etched on their faces. A brutal realization of their collective complicity, their willful blindness, their cowardly silence in the face of encroaching evil. Alistair Finch's dispatches, detailed and unflinching, would scorch redemption's name into the public record, a permanent brand of infamy. Silas watched the proceedings, a grim, sorrowful satisfaction mingling with profound sadness for the lost innocence, for the lives destroyed. The trials were sensational, captivating the territory. The evidence Silas had so courageously gathered was irrefutable, particularly Thorn's annotated Bible and the map. The desperate, self-serving testimonies of the landowners, each trying to lessen their own guilt by exposing Thorn's and Elspeth's deep manipulations and chilling justifications, were utterly damning. Thorn and Elspeth were found guilty of multiple counts of murder and other heinous crimes, facing the severest justice the territory could impose. The complicit landowners received harsh, lengthy sentences. Redemption, its dark secret laid bare, began a long, painful public process of atonement, its name forever synonymous with unimaginable darkness and betrayal. Redemption stripped bare, shamed, before the world began its arduous public penance. Years later, where Thorn's disgraced church once stretched its ominous shadow, a new structure gradually arose, built by hands seeking to cleanse the tainted ground: the House of Light. Clara, her silver hair now a shining, glorious banner of resilience, her luminous crimson eyes reflecting a hard-won compassion. Wisdom and an unbreakable spirit became its heart and soul. It was a sanctuary, a haven for children deemed other, for the outcast, the misunderstood, the forgotten, a living testament that hope, if tended with unwavering courage, boundless patience, and fierce compassion, could indeed thrive in the stoniest, most poisoned soil. Her journey to that point had been monumental, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Nightmares plagued her for years, shadowy tendrils of the Pigpen reaching for her in sleep. She flinched from unexpected touches, struggled mightily with trust, her heart a fortress built of fear. The scent of turned earth, the clinking of metal, even the sight of a simple chain could send her into paroxysms of trembling, her breath catching in her throat. One sun-drenched afternoon, years into her work at the House of Light, while guiding a group of potential benefactors through the rambling, cheerful building, she paused before an old, heavy iron-banded storeroom door, a relic from a previous grimmer structure on the site. For a paralyzing heartbeat, the air thickened, the acrid, familiar stench of the Pigpen flooding her senses and the imagined clink of her own ankle chain, echoing in the sudden silence of her mind. Her breath hitched, her carefully composed smile faltering. Her hand resting on the cold iron latch trembled. But then from beyond the door, she heard the distinct, joyful shriek of a child, engaged in an exuberant game of hide-and-seek. She saw the hopeful, expectant faces of the visitors. And more importantly, she felt the small, tentative hand of a newly arrived boy, his eyes wide with his own unspoken fears peeking from behind her skirts, slip trustingly into hers. Drawing a deep, steadying breath, a strength she'd fought for and earned with every fiber of her being, she pushed the heavy iron door open wide, and in here. She said, her voice clear and warm, betraying none of the inner turmoil, as she ushered them into a room filled with bright sunlight, pouring from a newly installed large window, is where we keep our brightest dreams and our loudest, most wonderful laughter. Silas's unwavering patient presence through the darkest years, Jedediah and old Martha's remembered uncomplicated kindness, and her own fierce burning desire to ensure no other child ever endured what she had forged an indomitable strength within her. Her first true joyous laugh, a sound that had bubbled up unexpectedly when Silas, in a rare moment of clumsiness, had stumbled and sat down hard in a mud puddle while trying to teach a stubborn calf to drink from a pail, was a cherished milestone. A sound he swore was the most beautiful healing music he'd ever heard. Her decision to found the House of Light had come from a passionate, unwavering determination to create a counter-narrative to redemption's darkness. She discovered her voice clear and strong, a voice used tirelessly to advocate for those who had none, those deemed too different to matter. Sometimes, she'd often tell a new frightened child, stroking their hair gently, "The world doesn't understand special things. It fears what it doesn't know. But here special is just another word for wonderful, for unique, for beloved. Here your differences are your strengths." Silas, her devoted, adopted father, her rock, and her champion, remained by her side, his quiet strength, her constant support. He watched children with unusual eyes, startling hair, quiet withdrawn demeanors, or boisterous untamed spirits, who in another time, another blighted place like the old redemption, might have faced only chains, neglect, or worse, now find safety. Learning friendship and unrestrained laughter within these walls, he'd often see Clara now, a graceful, compassionate woman, radiating an almost palpable warmth and a fierce, protective love, moving gently among them, her silver hair a beacon. He'd see her sit patiently for hours with a terrified new arrival, not speaking, just being present, a calm anchor in their stormy sea, until their fear began to lessen and a tiny hand sought hers. In those quiet, profound moments, Silas knew that by yanking one small, broken child from a pigpen's reeking mire, he had not only unearthed a town's monstrous, festering secret, but had against all odds helped plant a defiant, beautiful garden where only desolation, cruelty, and fear had reigned for generations. He never told Clara the full, agonizing extent of his own past losses in that other, similarly blighted town, nor the specific gnawing fears he'd harbored for his own daughter Sarah's difference, a difference that had made her a target for whispers long before sickness claimed her. He simply poured all the protective, unconditional love he had once felt for Sarah and for his firstborn son, gone even before her in a swift, cruel illness, into Clara, seeing in her survival, her thriving a victory over the pervasive darkness that had claimed his own children. He still carried the faded pressed bluebell carefully preserved between the pages of his worn Bible, a fragile token of his lost wife Mary and their first child, a boy whose laughter he could barely recall. One spring, years after their arrival at the future site of the House of Light, he quietly planted wild bluebells in the sanctuary's sprawling garden, watching them bloom each year, their delicate blue heads nodding in the gentle breeze. Seeing Clara's silver hair catch the sunlight as she pointed them out to a rapt child, her crimson eyes, soft with pleasure, no longer brought the sharp, gut-wrenching stab of grief he once endured, but a quiet, bittersweet, healing peace. Circles closing wounds, though scarred, finally blessedly healing redemption's deep darkness, lingered in memories and history books, a chilling reminder of unchecked cruelty and the insidious poison of fear. But now, the House of Light, a steadfast, unwavering beacon of hope and compassion, pushed that ancient darkness back, a luminous, enduring promise of renewal. His own long, dark, solitary night, the one he had walked since Mary and Sarah and his boy were taken from him, Silas knew with a quiet, peaceful certainty, was finally blessedly over. Word trickled back eventually, years later, carried by a traveling peddler who'd passed through many remote territories, of a woman with tired but kind eyes and an indefatigable spirit, running a small, struggling orphanage. Many states to the west, a place renowned far and wide for its surprisingly vibrant flower gardens, especially the brilliant, cheerful sunflowers that flanked every window and doorway. Silas often hoped with a quiet warmth in his chest that it was Martha Scallows, having found her own hard-won peace, her own way to cultivate light and beauty in the face of darkness, her own quiet, tenacious, and deeply personal redemption. She too, in her own brave way, had chosen light.